Null is C#'s concept of nothing. If you create a variable without assigning a value to it, it will often have a value of null. To begin this lesson, open the My Project sample file from your Sample Files folder. And open the code behind file of calculator.aspx if it isn't open already. Now add the following code to the page load event handler. String, null string, string, empty string equals, and an empty set of quote marks. Now set a breakpoint at the end of the page load event handler. You learned how to do this in lesson 3.3. Now right-click calculator.aspx in the Solution Explorer and click Set as Start Page from the shortcut menu. Then start debugging. When the page loads, it pauses at the breakpoint and you are returned to the code editor. If you're not automatically returned to Visual Studio, switch back to it manually without closing your web browser. Now check the values of the null string and empty string variables by hovering your mouse cursor over them. You can see that null string has a value of null, while empty string has an empty string instead of null. The distinction between null and an empty string is a very important one. You can perform most string methods with an empty string, but many methods would cause an exception if you tried to use them with a null string. If you tried to set the text property of a label control to null, for example, it would cause an exception. Stop debugging now by clicking the Stop button. Note that if you look at the IntelliSense menu for the string type by typing string dot, you can see a method called isNullOrEmpty. IsNull or empty is useful when you want to find out if a string is null or empty without having to check for both conditions. You'll learn about checking conditions in lesson 7.1. Next, you're going to try to create a null int variable. Add a new line and type int nullInt. Now start debugging again, and when the code pauses, check the value of nullInt. Instead of being null, the value is 0. This is because int variables aren't nullable by default. A normal int variable can never have a null value, and most of the time, that's exactly what you want. If you were to try to set nullInt to null by typing nullInt equals null, you would see an error. Stop debugging now, and you're going to change the code to create a nullable int variable. There are times when you want an int or other non-nullable variable to contain a null value, especially when working with databases, as you'll discover in lesson 12.8. Fortunately, it's very easy to make a variable nullable. Change the line int nullInt to int nullInt. Putting a question mark after int creates a nullable int variable. You can do this with other non-nullable types as well. For example, putting a question mark after double and float would create nullable versions of those types. You can't place a question mark after string because string is already nullable. Start debugging once more, and when the code pauses, check the value of nullInt. This time, you can see that nullInt has a null value. Stop debugging now. Remove all code from the page load event handler. Remove the breakpoint. And close Visual Studio, saving your changes if prompted. You've now completed Lesson 5.12. Understand Null.